We often see certain countries, their companies really seem to dominate specific industries globally. It makes you wonder, what's their secret? What's that uh, underlying advantage?
Exactly. Why do some nations just seem to breed success in certain areas?
Well, today for our short takes on strategy, we're actually diving into that. We're looking at Chapter 7 of Ketchen and Short's Mastering Strategic Management.
A classic text.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack a really insightful framework that tries to explain it. Think of this as your quick guide to understanding why some places become hotspots for success.
A shortcut to some key strategic thinking.
Exactly. It's funny, but I swear something a bit weird always seems to happen when we record these short takes.
Agrees. There does seem to be a pattern.
But let's park that for a moment. Our main goal today, Michael Porter's diamond model of national advantage. Let's get into it.
Okay, yeah. So Michael Porter, his diamond model, sometimes called the determinants of national advantage. It gives us a way to analyze why companies from certain countries do better internationally in specific industries.
And it's called the diamond model because...
Because there are four key factors, all interconnected, that he argues determine this advantage. If you picture a diamond shape, there's a factor at each point.
Okay, got the visual. Let's start with the first point then. Demand conditions. What's that about?
Right, demand conditions. This basically refers to the nature of your home market customers, specifically how demanding or sophisticated they are.
Okay, so you'd think maybe having easy-to-please customers would be good, right? Less hassle.
Well, that's the interesting part. Porter argues the exact opposite. Having really demanding domestic customers is actually a huge advantage.
Huh. How so? That feels a bit counterintuitive.
Because those demanding customers push companies constantly. They force them to innovate, improve quality, get better faster. Think about Japanese consumers, for example.
Okay, yeah.
Huh?
Known for being meticulous.
Extremely. There are high standards for reliability, for quality, even for design. It forced Japanese car companies like Honda, Toyota, Nissan to just get really, really good at making high-quality, dependable cars.
Uh-huh.
And that capability, honed at home, became a massive advantage when they went international. It wasn't just a preference, it's almost cultural, that expectation of precision.
Right, that makes sense. It forces a higher standard from the get-go. And the book contrasts this with French automakers.
Yeah, the text suggests that, historically at least, French consumers maybe weren't as demanding in the same ways.
Yeah.
And that perhaps contributed to Renault and Peugeot maybe facing more challenges competing globally compared to the Japanese giants.
Right.
Less pressure at home, maybe less prepared for the global fight.
So it's about that high bar. The German example with Fahrvergnügen seems relevant here too.
Absolutely. That whole concept of driving pleasure combined with, the Autobahn having sections with no speed limits.
Yeah, that's a unique testing ground.
Totally. It creates this intense demand for high-performance engineering, handling, speed. So companies like Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, they had to excel in those areas just to satisfy their home market.
And that excellence translates directly into the luxury and performance segments worldwide.
Exactly. Their success internationally is built on meeting those incredibly high domestic demands first.
Okay, clear on demand. Let's move to the second point of the diamond. Factor conditions. What falls under this?
So factor conditions are basically the nation's inputs for production. Think raw materials, land, but also labor-skilled and unskilled capital, infrastructure, that sort of thing.
The basic building blocks, essentially.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And having good factor conditions can definitely give you a leg up. The U.S. historically benefited from lots of natural resources, a large land area.
Right. Or China, with its huge labor force that fueled manufacturing growth.
Exactly. Access to cheap labor was a key factor there. Those are the obvious advantages.
But the book says disadvantages here can also spur innovation. How does that work?
Yeah, that's another kind of counterintuitive point, but really important. Sometimes lacking a resource forces you to be creative.
Okay, like what?
Japan, again, is the classic example. Limited land, limited space, especially for warehousing. It was a real constraint.
Right, it's a crowded country.
So that pressure forced Japanese companies to figure out how to operate with minimal inventory. And that necessity led to the development of things like just-in-time, or JIT, inventory management.
Ah, okay. So the lack of space drove an innovation that then became a global advantage.
Precisely. JIT wasn't just about saving space. It led to leaner operations, less waste, more efficiency overall. A disadvantage turned into a major competitive strength.
Fascinating. Okay, third point. Related and supporting industries. What's the focus here?
This looks at whether a country has strong, internationally competitive supplier industries or related industries that feed into the main one you're looking at.
So like the ecosystem around the industry.
Exactly. Think about Italian high fashion shoes. Brands like Ferragamo, Prada, Gucci.
Yeah, legendary stuff.
Well, they benefit hugely from having a world-class leather industry right there in Italy. High-quality suppliers, close by, lots of expertise.
Right, they had to import all that leather from far away. It would be slower, probably costlier, less flexible.
Definitely. And it's not just about the materials, it's the whole network. The skilled artisans, the machinery suppliers, the shared knowledge. It creates a cluster of excellence.
And this applies beyond materials, right? The book mentioned cars and electronics.
Yeah, good example.
Yeah.
South Korean car makers like Kia and Hyundai can easily tap into the expertise of domestic giants like Samsung and LG for their in-car electronics.
A built-in advantage.
And similarly, Japanese car firms have benefited from close ties with Sony and others. The text suggests, again, that French automakers maybe didn't have that same level of globally competitive domestic electronics partners, which could have made integrating advanced tech a bit harder or slower.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is. That story about Otabo LLC, the U.S. shoe company, really drove this home for me.
Oh yeah, that's a stark example. A U.S. company trying to make custom shoes domestically.
And they had to shut their U.S. factory down and move to China.
Right. Because the skilled labor, the specialized suppliers, the machinery technicians, that whole ecosystem had largely disappeared in the U.S. because most shoe production had already moved overseas, mostly to China.
So even if you have the will, if the supporting industries aren't there.
It's incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, to compete effectively. The infrastructure just wasn't there for them in the U.S. anymore.
Wow. Okay, final point of the diamond. Company strategy, structure, and rivalry. This sounds like it's about the companies themselves and how they compete at home.
That's exactly it. It focuses on how companies are created, organized, and managed, but crucially also on the intensity of domestic competition.
So lots of local rivals fighting it out is actually good.
Very good.
Yeah.
According to Porter, the idea is that intense domestic rivalry pushes companies to be their best. They have to innovate constantly, cut costs, improve efficiency, market aggressively just to survive against their local competitors.
Like athletes training against tough opponents. The book used that analogy.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. If you have to fight tooth and nail just to be the best in your own country, you're likely going to be much tougher when you compete internationally.
So thinking back to the car examples, Hyundai and Kia battling it out in South Korea.
Exactly. Or Honda, Nissan, Toyota, plus Mitsubishi, Suzuki, Mazda, all competing fiercely within Japan. That intense pressure cooker environment forged really strong global competitors.
Okay. And the flip side, again, might be Renault and Peugeot in France, where maybe the domestic competition wasn't quite as cutthroat historically.
That's the suggestion. Less intense domestic rivalry might mean less pressure to constantly innovate and optimize, which could potentially make it harder to compete against those battle-hardened firms from Japan or Korea on the world stage.
Right. This diamond model really ties a lot of things together. It's quite comprehensive.
It is. It forces you to look beyond just one company or one factor.
Okay, so we've got the 4 points. Demand conditions, factor conditions, related and supporting industries, and this domestic rivalry piece. Now, the big question. If you had to pick one, which do you think is the most critical? The real linchpin?
Ooh, that's tough. They're also interconnected, as the diamond shape suggests. But, if forced to choose, I might lean towards factor conditions being the most foundational.
Really? Why factor conditions?
Well, you just need something to start with, right? You need the basic inputs, be it resources or baseline level of skilled labor or infrastructure. Without some fundamental factors in place, it's hard for demanding customers or intense rivalry to even emerge and have an effect. It's like the ground floor.
Okay, I see the logic. You need the raw materials, literally or figuratively.
Yeah. Like the U.S. having abundant resources historically, or even Japan's disadvantage driving JIT, it starts with the factor situation.
That's a fair argument,
Okay.
but I think I might argue for demand conditions.
Oh, interesting. Make the case.
Well, it seems to me that having those sophisticated, demanding customers is what really lights the fire under innovation and quality improvement. If your home market constantly pushes you, forces you to be world-class just to survive domestically, that seems like the most powerful engine for creating global competitiveness. Think about the German car example again. It wasn't just that they could build performance cars. It was that their domestic market demanded it because of Fahrvergnügen and the Autobahn. That specific demand shaped their capabilities.
That's a strong point. The market pull driving specific kinds of excellence. And you're right, demanding customers can certainly pressure suppliers and intensify rivalry too.
Exactly. It pulls the other elements along.
It really shows how they feed each other. Maybe the most important depends on the industry or the specific context.
Yeah, that's probably the most realistic answer. The diamond works because they all matter and interact. Speaking of weird things, while we've been talking,
Uh-oh, what now?
I just saw, I kid you not, a pit bull literally chasing the garbage truck and the trash man down the street.
You're kidding?
Nope, see, I told you something weird always happens when we record these short takes. It's like a curse.
Chuckles. Okay, well, maybe that's an extreme example of
Yeah.
factor conditions interacting with local rivalry. I don't know. Let's get back to Porter.
Right. Focus.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping up on the model itself. Porter's diamond gives us 4 key lenses: demand conditions, factor conditions, related and supporting industries, and company strategy, structure, and rivalry.
And understanding how these 4 elements interact within a nation helps explain why its companies might excel in certain industries globally. It's about the whole national ecosystem.
It definitely moves beyond just looking at single firms in isolation.
For sure. It's a much richer, more holistic view.
So a final thought to leave our listeners with. Thinking about this diamond model, what emerging countries or maybe regions do you think might be poised for a breakout? Where do you see these diamond elements maybe starting to align strongly for future international success in particular sectors?
Ooh, that's a great question. It really makes you apply the framework and look for those signals. Maybe it's growing domestic demand in India for certain tech, or perhaps developing supplier networks in Southeast Asia for electronics. Lots to think about.
Definitely food for thought. And for you listening, think about your own industry or areas you follow. How do these forces, demand, factors, suppliers, rivalry play out? Are they helping or hindering? It's a powerful lens to use. Thanks for joining us for this short take on strategy.